So providing a snapshot today, and hopefully that can spark, oh, that's a beautiful picture, spark questions or even action after today. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I only have 5 minutes, and I understand that most of the participants today will have older children. But I think addressing that early intervention space is critical and getting ready for school. So important to recognise that when I first meet families, the first questions I often get is, what school shall I go to? Can I go to a regular school? Can I go to a regular babies group, a play group, a daycare? And so what I would love to say to families is, don't put limitations on your child or your journey. Be open to everything. So those critical moments of being able to attend an ordinary local mothers group, all those little events like attending daycare, preschool, are wonderful stepping stones for getting ready for kindergarten. It allows you to develop your advocacy skills, knowing how to set up an environment for your child, knowing what questions to ask. These become all important when we're starting to get ready for school. As part of that early intervention space, a big transition point that we can't ignore is NDIS. That is the gateway to accessing services. And I'm just going to give sort of broad statements and kind of key tips. I would say don't wait for your doctor or your ophthalmologist to recommend early intervention services or to access NDIS. If your child has a vision diagnosis and you feel like that they need support and you need support, do contact NDIS and find out whether your child might be eligible. The other tricky thing about that is that sometimes NDIS isn't really great at understanding vision diagnoses and understanding support needs for children. So if you find there are obstacles there, my next recommendation would be to contact one of the vision organisations like NextSense, Vision Australia, Guide Dogs, and talk to a service provider and ask them to help you access NDIS. We've had lots of occasions, both from an early intervention perspective, but even children in primary school and high school who have needed advocacy and support to get onto NDIS because they just haven't understood the need. So that's a big sort of tip there. When to start school transition? That's a question that always pops up, and I think, like Jodie said, even within the TAFE area of education, earlier the better. I've had examples of children in when a family has learnt that their child has no vision, contact a school in their first year of life to say, hey, I'm in your local school area, just letting you know that we're transitioning and enrolling in 2024. And if you're doing any works around the school, I just want you to be mindful that perhaps you need to consider a child with who has no vision. So it can be as early as that. And I think when you're thinking about school transition, it even starts earlier, thinking about what school system your child wants to go into. They're important questions. Is it going to be Catholic Ed? Is it going to be Department of Education or independent school? And there's always pros and cons around all of those. But I think the important thing for a parent is to understand what each of those school systems offers and how vision support takes place. The best person to possibly ask there would be your early intervention provider. They have a lot of information and they can guide you, but also going to a lot of Department of Ed orientation days where they have for school transition and school readiness. So think about those three school systems. The other thing would be to think about what preschool your child goes to, and thinking about where that preschool feeds into your local school community. We often families often like to go to a local community preschool so that then they can form social networks, both from a parent perspective, but also for children, and collectively transition into the local kindergarten. It just makes it a slightly easier process, but that always isn't possible. And to let you know that we can successfully transition kids into any kindergarten or any preschool. So important to note that if you want to make it happen, there are services that can support you in any of those transitions. And even if you've left things a little bit late, and some parents have different parenting styles, they're happy to go along with the flow. It's never too late. We can always rally around and provide supports and put supports in place to help and ensure that we have successful transitions in place. So I guess the other next step in terms of key in getting into that transition to school mode, I would say when a child turns 3, we tend to shift gears. We're really into developing those skills and developing the advocacy for parents to be able to ask questions and to start scout around which schools they're likely to opt for their child. Now, when it comes to Department of Ed, you're not going to be able to do shopping around schools. It usually is your local school that you have to start the process off with. And that process is usually contacting the principal. Sometimes you might be put through to the assistant principal, and to let them know your child has a vision impairment and you're looking for school enrolment. I think that's really critical. Don't be put off if the principal might not know what to do with that information. If they've never supported a child in the past, they're likely not going to be a great source of information on that first point of call. And I think it's important not to judge a school based on that first contact. What you're really looking for is, how does that school respond to that request? Are they happy to collaborate with you and take on ideas? Are they happy to collaborate with your team of whether they be therapists or your vision itinerant that you might have access to prior to entering school. So it's really important to understand that schools may not have all the necessary skills or understanding, but it's really about that process. And if they come on board, then you've probably got a great school. We do have some scenarios with certain schools where principals are not keen to liaise. They don't want to talk to service providers. They really don't want to have an open conversation about what level of supports they can provide. That to me would send some alarm bells, because if you can't have a collaborative process, and it really does take a team to support a child with a vision impairment, then you may want to start reconsidering. I think the other big important thing is, if your school principal says, look, don't call us until the year you're starting school, I would still make the effort of doing it at least 2 years beforehand. Some families can request having vision itinerant support as part of an early intervention program the year before school. So that's important for the Department of Ed to know that you exist, and that you might be eligible to receive this early intervention vision support in your local preschool to help support that transition process. So if schools know that you exist, they can start to allocate funds for that and start planning. So that's an important thing to have embedded as you talk to your principals. And I think the other big tip, I think, how many minutes have I been yabbing on about?
You've been about 8 minutes.
Oh, geez. Last thing is that in order to start your transition process, make sure you have all your reports up to date. And in particular, ophthalmology reports, which is required to have eligibility check off for vision support or to obtain vision itinerant support. So really important to have an ophthalmology report within that last 6 months before starting school, so that you can tick off all the eligibility criteria. So I think that's just a quick snapshot. Hopefully, if you have any questions, you can email me. I think it's, that's the wrong email. But Michael, if at all possible, if you could put out an email, I'll put it on the chat so that if anyone wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to.
Don't worry, we will share out your details as appropriate. And of course, there's plenty of room for people to ask questions in the panel. Okay. I've already introduced Claire. So Claire, would you like to go next, or is Paul going?
Paul next, sorry.
Okay. My chance to introduce Paul. Here we go, Paul. You thought I'd neglected you. Okay. Paul is the location lead and a certified orientation and mobility specialist based out of the Wollongong office of Guide Dogs New South Wales, ACT. He's worked in the field for 13 years, and he specialises in access, early childhood and school-age orientation and mobility. Outside of work, he is a suffering Canterbury Bulldogs fan, enjoys cricket, hiking, and everything to do with the beach and summer, which is fortunately getting closer and closer to us right now. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers. So as Anna went through, I'm just going to do a bit of a snapshot about orientation and mobility, what orientation and mobility is, and how orientation and mobility, the role orientation and mobility will play with students in regards to transitions. So I guess I want to start with emphasising the importance of linking in with an orientation and mobility specialist as early as possible. Trying to include one in your team of specialists that a student may be working with vision loss and the importance of that with the transitions through the different stages of school. So I guess that includes from preschool all the way through to primary school, high school, and the post-school options and journeys that our students will go through as well. And as Anna said, making sure that a referral or you're working on some of those programs well before that transition takes place as well. So ensuring your orientation and mobility specialists can work on some of those skills or goals well before transitioning into preschool or kindy or high school as well. So I'm just going to start with maybe just going into a little bit about what an orientation and mobility specialist does. So I guess their instruction enables a child with vision loss to safely access the environment, develop movement skills and spatial concepts, and I guess engage with age-appropriate activities with their peers, developing responsibility for her own travel and age-appropriate skills, are key, I guess, for a child's future independent mobility and active participation in society. The approach of guide dogs or any orientation and mobility specialist is to build capacity in the caregivers, educators, and working closely with them, with a child and their supports to ensure a collaborative transdisciplinary model of providing that orientation and mobility services. So an O&M, orientation and mobility specialist, is specifically trained to teach individuals in all different age groups who are blind or have low vision to travel safely, confidently in their environment. They'll support a child with the following types of goals. So concept development around body image, spatial awareness, positional and directional concepts, motor development and working with others in regards to that. So that includes gait, straight line travel and things like that as well. Sensory skills and training to perceive their environment via their residual vision and other senses. Developing orientation and mobility techniques, such as protective techniques, landmarking, maintaining orientation, use of low vision aids and whatnot related to orientation and mobility, orientation and mobility skills. So using of their primary mobility aids, such as the long cane, guiding techniques, and working collaboratively at home, school, work, and in the local community. Developing and maintaining orientation and mobility skills when using public transport, and generalising those orientation and mobility skills when we're working on different travel routes in the community or at school or wherever as well. And also social skills, so they can solicit aid and assist with problem solving and that as well. So relating it back to school, orientation and mobility is part of the expanded core curriculum. So I guess the orientation and mobility specialist plays a really important part, collaborating with educators and vision support teachers to ensure, I guess, that orientation and mobility training is implemented holistically at home, school, and the community. A collaboratively approach and consistent approach is sort of done with the orientation and mobility training. As I've mentioned before, that coaching and collaboration is really important. So I guess identifying key areas of doing a routines-based assessment, ensuring those skills are implemented within the child's routine, so it's purposeful and taught in a meaningful way, whether that's at school and working with the educators, vision support team, and that, and with the family and other key supports. I guess the goals that we work on are always going to be outcomes based and an individualized approach to just to ensure that individual student is working on goals and that are sort of appropriate for the stage they're up to in their current life. So I guess transitions, maybe some practical examples of some transition where how orientation and mobility may link in with the team would be, I guess a practical example is transitioning into kindergarten, working with the family when they're identifying what school they're going to go into, and then working as part of that team to do some training at the school, working with the vision support team and family in regards to the skills that we're integrating into that new routine, so they can safely and get around the new campus or new school efficiently, effectively, using their mobility aids and the age appropriate skills that they might be up to. I guess as they progress through the different stages of school, we're teaching different skills at an age appropriate level, I guess. So as we're going into high school and things like that, we're starting to look at mobile phones and GPS applications, use of public transport and things like that as well. So just emphasising the importance that we're building the skills. So we're at a level where we can do those age appropriate activities and transition to those level of schools appropriately. We also have an access component, I guess, to what we do as orientation and mobility specialists, and that'll vary depending on the schooling system. So I guess at times we'll give advice and collaborate in regards to the built environment and how we can implement O&M skills in those new school environments, and maybe suggest and recommend changes to that built environment. And for some education and school systems, that could be as thorough as providing a report in regards to that as well. So I guess as an orientation and mobility discipline, we can access NDIS funding. So we are linking through that improved daily living capacity building component of that. So linking students' plans into some of the goals that we're achieving in regards to orientation and mobility.
Fantastic.
I think I've probably gone close to that 5 or 10 minutes, so I'll pass over to Claire.
Perfect, Paul. Claire, my third attempt at introducing you.
Hello. Just while I'm sharing my screen with you, we've just had a band of storms pass over us, so I hope that no more come. And if I do lose any power, Mike, we'll just go back to go to questions.
We'll be fine, don't you worry.
All right. Just sorry, I can't find my slideshow. It's hidden by sorry, I'll move my menu. Now, I hope you've got my slideshow there now. So school is a series of transitions, some bigger than others. Of course, every year your child transitions from one year to the other. They're the smaller ones, but the main ones are preschool to kindergarten, and that's probably the biggest one that I'm going to focus on today. And then infants to primary, year 6 to year 7, year 10 to year 11, and then year 12 to post-school. They're the big ones, but lots of little ones in between. So today I'm just going to explain briefly what your teacher, your specialist teacher, the role of the specialist teacher, and how we prepare for those transitions. So your specialist vision support teacher, in each sector, there are 3 different sectors: the Catholic, the independent sector, and in the Department of Education. All the specialist teachers have all the same outcomes for your student, but we just may do them all in a slightly different way. I'm in the independent schools. I've transitioned to students to kindergarten, all the way to transitioning students from year 12 and to tertiary or to jobs. So all the same outcomes. As a specialist teacher, we know that not one size fits all for the technology that your students need or the solutions your child needs in education. And I'm really sorry to hear of Naz's one bad egg. I don't think there are many bad eggs of us, and it's just really sad to hear of that. But most of us are pretty across all the different adjustments and understanding that vision impairment is nuanced and there are many different solutions for the students depending on their impairment. Our ultimate goal for your student is that they leave school independent and ready to start whatever they want to do when they leave school. And that's what we're working towards from kindergarten. So preschool to kindergarten. The big one is, as Anna had said, just to make sure that year before school that you've got everything lined up. Once you've chosen your school, make sure that that school has indicated that they want to have a specialist teacher in that school, and all the forms and everything are filled out before your child starts school so that everything is ready for day one next year. We need to know where to allocate the specialist teachers to schools the year before so that we're ready and everything's, that we're resourced and your school's going to be resourced. So that's the year maybe, just to be on the ball and just make sure that all those forms are filled out, all the appropriate agencies are contacted, and that your specialist teacher will be ready for day one. Just before day one though, for orientation that often happens in term 4, and preparation, environment preparation for your student, that happens in term 4. So often your key vision worker in preschool will go to orientation with your student, and guide dogs hopefully will be in there assessing the environment, doing an environmental audit, and just making changes for safety and for access for your student, as well as orienting your student to the school so that they know where everything is, and they're familiar with the environment before they start school. They get familiar before the school playground's busy and there are lots of people around. So that's all really important in that year before school to get set up. And I think that's probably the biggest time that you need to be on the ball there and just make sure that everyone's being connected. Term 1 can be a really big adjustment for school, and there might be a few hiccups along the way, but it will get better and better. What's a parent had actually told me that, but you do have a team working for your student, and where that team's working for the most successful transition and ongoing education for your student. So vision support starts, and what the specialist teacher does is really advises the teacher and works with the student. So advises the teacher and the school, provides professional development for the school so that everything's adjusted, that we can make all the right adjustments for your student, and also works with the student in the classroom, working at finding, I'll go on to the next slide there. So we'll be looking at the areas, and particularly in kindergarten, we're setting it all up. What's the learning media? Is it braille? Is it large print? What technology will you need? The lighting is correct. There's no glare. Well, we reduce glare as much as possible. Seating position, classroom setup, organisation, and, well, I've already said technology, but that's what we'll be going through in those first years. But every year we look at all these areas, and every year we plan and move forward with those, moving to the next classroom. The year before, we'll check that classroom at the end of the year before and make sure that it's set up correctly and we've got the most appropriate classroom. So I'm just going to explain very quickly about the expanded core curriculum. These are the extra skills that your student needs, your child needs to get through education and through life. And specialist teachers will be teaching the extra core curriculum. So if you haven't heard of it before, these are the main areas: assistive technology, and that's a really big one for school. Compensatory skills for braille or becoming more organised. Sensory efficiency skills, orientation mobility, which is what Paul was talking about, self-determination and advocacy, social interaction and recreation and leisure. Because school's just not all about just learning, but it's about socialisation, it's about recreation, it's about everything. So the specialist teacher will be looking at the expanded core curriculum and connecting you to agencies if we need to have some, your child needs to have some assistance with the expanded core curriculum outside of school, but also teaching them inside of school. And as I've just said, technology is one of the big things that specialist teachers will be teaching your child. So that's the first transitions to kindergarten. We've gone through year 1, then we go to year 2, and then we're going into primary. It's at the same school, but there'll be new playground areas. Your child will be made familiar with those areas and oriented, different facilities, changing nature of textbooks and novels. Those are things as they go up through the curriculum, up through the grades, there's more demand put upon them. They have to access more literacy and more text, new technology. That's just generally those higher expectations for independence, application and organisation. Your specialist teacher has an eye on the future all the time. So we're always looking to see what technology skills, what skills your child will need for the following, what's coming up in the following year. And so we're always pre-teaching those skills so that technology is familiar, so that when they need to use it, they're familiar and able to use it as the nature of learning changes and gets more complicated. From year 6 to year 7, that's another fairly big transition. Sometimes you stay in your same school, but other times you go to a completely new school. So again, a similar transition program to kindergarten. There'll be an environmental audit. Your child will be oriented to the school before they start there, particularly when there's not many people there. You'll probably have a few more visits to the high school with your guide dog instructor or with someone, your orientation mobility specialist, as well as going to the normal orientation sessions. And of course, you'll have your specialist teacher from your year 6 helping you to orientate to your school in year 7. Organisation is a very big thing for year 7 for any student, so that's a very important skill we keep our eye on. I've talked about the site risk technology. Some schools bring your own, some schools provide the technology. We make sure that technology is what your child needs. It's suitable, it's powerful enough, it copes with all the software that you need or your child needs. So we're across all that beforehand. Of course, changing uniforms, carnivals, we're advising on that. School camps, right through primary to secondary. We advise on school camps. We want your children to go to camps. So we just make sure that everything's set up at that time, at the camps that everyone feels comfortable and happy and safe. And we provide professional learning to all of the school staff and subject teachers in secondary, and we do it at the beginning of every year. So year 10 to 11 is the next big one. Subject selection, TVET courses. If you have to go out to TAFE, we'll organise that. And again, orientation mobility around that. Provisions, your child will have been having disability provisions for exams and assessments from year 7, but that's when we have to start to apply to NESA for them to be approved for the HSC. Work placement, work experience, if that's an option at the school. Technology, if you need more, as your child moves through, there's more technology skills that they need to acquire. Hopefully we're ahead of that, and you might need become very good at screen reading in year 11 because of the amount of text that you have to process. Look at effective study habits and organisation, and travel training, learning to catching the bus to school, the train to school, and also getting out with your peers and working with guide dogs or your orientation mobility instructors to make sure that your child's getting to school, but also is able to just move around the community. And the last thing is we help with transition from school, and it's usually liaising with other agencies like the Vision Australia, that fantastic LEAP program, but we're preparing for that in year 11 as to careers advice and transition to school and subject choice, university choice. We're across that in year 11 and 12 too, so that your child transitions from school independent and ready to do whatever they want. One more thing there that's a big thing that's a little bit of a bugbear with me with my students is that we're there to advise on technology all throughout school and to increase their independence and push students towards independence. But when they leave school, I hope my students have enough technology skills so that they can actually keep up with technology and find solutions for themselves as technology changes all the time. So that's the kind of students we like to see graduating from school, ready to do whatever they choose to do. And I'll finish there for questions. I hope I wasn't too long.
Thank you. No, we're all good. Thank you, panel. Let's go to Q&A time. That was very enriched. I've got a list of questions, so let's dive in. Now, first question, how many more minutes has a child to do an ICAS test or a NAPLAN test or a selective exam, etc.?
Okay. Look, I haven't done an ICAS assessment for a while, but I think they're pretty good with extra time. I did go onto the site briefly. You have to actually contact them for accessibility because I think they'll provide the ICAS in large print, but I haven't done those for a while. But in school, it depends on the level of vision impairment and what they're using for accessing the exams. Rule of thumb's 5 minutes per half hour for a lot of low vision students, and often 10 minutes in maths or in science because they're very, very visual subjects. But you can get up to 10 and 15 minutes per half hour, just depending on what your need is, and particularly how much technology you're using. And so yeah. As well as that, rest breaks are recommended too, and they usually come in 5 minutes per half hour.
And is that typically just organised by the school or the support or the parents? How do the mechanics work?
Within school internally from year 7, the school can choose what provisions they give the students. But your specialist teacher will be advising around those provisions to make sure that they're what Nessa would probably give in the HSC. We're pretty good at understanding and knowing that. So the specialist teacher will advise the school what provisions, and they really should start from year 7. In fact, in primary school, you would get extra time there as well. So any assessment, that must be in large print or in Braille or have a screen reader, so that it must be made accessible. You have extra time to process material, and the specialist teacher will advise that.
Next question. How do we best support technology training for someone who needs to learn assistive tech but undertakes studies in rural areas?
Okay. I think the best way to do that would be through, if you haven't got it at school and you don't have if you're being homeschooled or you don't have a specialist teacher in your local school, I think it would be best to contact one of the vision organisations and use your NDIS money to have technology training. And you can get technology training packages. So that, and if you're in rural, your specialist teacher in school will often be able to train you in technology quite well and adequately, but sometimes you still we will access a training package outside of school with NDIS in urban areas, or if you're at school. Rural areas, you would have to have it over, I guess, Zoom. Some organisations organise camps for a week during the year where they might come down to the organisation for the week and learn Braille and look at technology then. So there are different offerings from different organisations. NextSense, Vision Australia, I'm not quite sure what they do, but at NextSense we do offer those things. But I think NDIS.
Yeah, okay. Now we've got a couple of kind of bundled questions that are about like how does referrals work? How does service engagement work? So first one is orientation and mobility, that general process. I've got how, regardless of system, how does a school or a parent obtain that orientation, mobility, and general safety service? How does it all kick off? And what rights, I suppose, do parents have to expect for their kids?
I might jump in there, Michael, if that's all right. Yeah, great question. I guess my suggestion would be to link in with a vision loss organisation as early as possible, and to link in with orientation and mobility service. So I guess I can speak from a guide dog's perspective in regards to how we provide it, that I guess that if there's a functional impact from any vision loss from an eye condition, we can work through work on their goals and do an assessment and everything like that.
But how did that initial reach out happen? As in, is it a parent who then picks up the phone, or is it the school doing it?
Well, I'm often hoping that they're linked into our orientation and mobility services well before school starts. But I guess it could be a parent. It could be, often we get some great referrals from the vision support team as well. But it can be basically anyone can refer. for orientation and mobility services, and hopefully, in the best case scenarios, that we're linked into orientation and mobility services well before we're getting into those school.
So it's a genuine transition from kind of preschool life to into school life.
From birth, I guess, Michael. So often we're working with kids straight away and working with all those transitions to preschool to kindergarten, all the way through those school transitions.
Great. Okay, so that's the call out for the parents there. Once the child is born, you're talking to your orientation and mobility specialists, amongst others. So the next question I've got is, in school, who does the Braille? How does that work?
You mean the formatting of the Braille textbooks, or teaching the Braille?
Who converts everything from not Braille to Braille?
Okay, so for example, in the independent school system that I work in, we have a team of they're called AIS, and they are a team of people that format all the textbooks into Braille, worksheets, everything into Braille, and it's given to the school. We need advance notice as teachers, so the specialist teacher, me, will always be saying, well, what do you need next term? We need to get it in so it's formatted readily. I think DET are the same in the Catholic sector. They all have people who format Braille for them. And there is a certain level of sharing amongst textbooks, I believe. I'm not in the AIS team, but there is another team that the teacher says, this is what we need, and that team does the Braille, and the teacher takes it and gives it to the school.
Right. So basically, the specialist who's parachuted in with your child and to help your child and teacher, they should know what door to knock on, so the school can say, here's a pile of books with many, many pages. Please go to work.
It's a really big part of our job is processing the large print. I suppose I didn't actually mention that in my presentation, but that's the Braille. That's a very large part of our role.
Excellent. Okay. Next one. How do the needs of and the interactions between a young child, maybe just entering school, differ from those of an older child in terms of the services that need to be engaged? Bit of a broad one, though.
Look, the specialist teacher at the beginning of in kindergarten, we probably spend a little bit more time with our kindergarten children if we can within our caseloads to make sure that transition's smooth and that we start the setup at the school. We spend the same amount of time really with our students right through school, because as they go through school in each year group, their needs change, and we make sure that they're able to have the adjustments that they can meet the needs of the curriculum. Technology starts simple and then it keeps growing, gets more and more complicated, and we are still teaching those skills up to often about year 11. The students, that's a very general statement, but the students are very fluent with technology and know what they're using and able to use it very, very well. But it's a continual process of teaching, and just like teaching is from kindergarten to year 12, it's just a growth.
And how does support work for teachers? So as a teacher, I'd assume the majority of teachers probably are told in term 4, you're going to be teaching a VI student, and on average, probably the first time they've ever done that. How does the reach out and support work for a teacher?
Well, your specialist teacher is the key person there. We develop a relationship with that teacher. We provide professional development for that teacher and for the teachers on the grade and for the specialist teachers that might be, if you've got a sport teacher or music, we provide professional development at the very beginning of each year. And once, it's a bit tricky going into kindergarten, because if they're only in our caseload at the beginning of the year, it has to happen at the beginning of kindergarten. But after that, it will happen before, usually before you go into year 1. So the new teachers, there's a handover and there's professional development provided. And there are days that full professional development days that mainstream teachers come to at NextSense, for example. We're quite a provider of professional development, that they come and have a whole day of professional development, basically on how to make adjustments for your vision impaired student. And it's ongoing. And every time a new maths concept's introduced, that specialist teacher will say, right, well, let's look at how we teach that. How are we going to make that accessible for the student? It's not one size fits all. It's just problem solving along the way too. If it's low vision, you'll do it differently from a student that's blind. But all through the year, we're looking at the program, working together on the program and making sure where the resources are there and ready to go. That's the ideal world. It mostly works like that. Occasionally there are hiccups, but mostly not. It's ongoing all the time.
And I'll do one more question. I'll also throw something in from the audience, from Kim Barber in the audience. The Department of Education, Braille and large print services provide all text for students, and we have 11 Braille outposts across the states that support Braille production of classroom materials, which is awesome. Thank you, Kim, much appreciated. I'm going to throw one to Anna, because you did mention the role of the principal. And I suppose this is a lot of questions when they hit that first transition period as parents. They're trying to work out what school for my child. And I know the principal question is a big part of it. Would you like to talk at all about the importance of kind of the senior leadership in the school in assessing what works for you?
Look, I think you're talking about as part of that transition process, Michael.
Yeah, and also as parents trying to decide, where do I send my child?
Yeah, look, I think if I was a parent, I'd be looking at the amount of collaboration that the school's willing to engage in with a parent and with additional services. And I think when a school has never supported a child with a vision impairment, there has to be open learning on both sides, and to be able to, parents and service providers, having supported that child up until that point, have a lot of good information and usually have good suggestions and recommendations. So I think it's really important for that transition process for schools to be open, have lots of meetings, be open to having extra orientation sessions at the school to meet that individual need for that child. So you're really looking at, is that school willing to take on new information and go the extra mile, I think, in order to accommodate a child with a vision impairment.
Just add to that, I think, Anna, as an orientation and mobility specialist, having a really collaborative principal has been great in some instances where we can even go in school holidays and do some O&M sessions, and I guess that emphasises the importance of an early referral and being linked in as early as possible as well.
And I'll often say most schools are open to these experiences. If you're finding lots of roadblocks, then I think it can be a sign of things. And perhaps my suggestion there is that if the principal's not very, very helpful, is try to perhaps work around that and get the input from the school counsellor to get part of that process so they can also facilitate things.